Welcome to another episode of Raiders of the Unknown's Jesus Wars. Today, I'm by myself here debating and talking about subjects that are important to all of us. We are doing two reviews, one of video posted on YouTube, passed on by a group that I follow, and then the other one is an overall perspective on how can two opposing views be true at the same time, which I do not agree with. So we start off with a very popular YouTuber, and one of my friends is a student of his. He posted the following video called "The Torah of Jesu Hanotzi versus the Gospel of Jesus Christ." This is from the Kosher Torah School of Rabbi Ariel Tzadok or Tzadok. So he has a big following, and we're going to be discussing some of the issues with what he's saying. So let us get started. So this idea that well-known and respected to his followers and has a big YouTube presence, that we would dare to challenge what he's saying. Again, we are not interested in debating individuals or coming after them. We're interested in their ideas. So if he would like to come on our show and talk about his premise, we would love to have him, but this is my shot at countering some of his arguments. So he starts off with the idea that that he's an Orthodox rabbi, which I have to have respect and admiration for the amount of learning and studying that it takes to be a rabbi. So, I usually do not push credentials, since I believe that the proof is in the pudding. So there's a lot of people that have a lot of credentials, and then they have limited understanding, or their ideas are not well developed or expressed. So we'll give him the respect. If he were to enter into the room, I would stand up, as we commonly do in Judaism for a rabbi. He has a long history of involvement in media, such as speaking on ancient aliens, and has done a lot of work with the Kabbalah and the prophets, and some of the connection with modern psychology and things like that. But going on to his presentation, he starts off with a very positive view of Jesus, describing him as a source of inspiration for thousands, and someone that could be admired in some ways. And then he takes a turn. I also wanted to share that both him and I have done work with the Noahide community, and those are very interesting individuals who have mostly a Christian background, but they decide to become supporters of Judaism. And then Rabbi Tzadok goes and teaches them. And then I have been involved with a Breslev group of Noahides who were supporting the Breslev movement, and they're very kind-hearted, loving people who are almost like, in limbo, not having a community to be part of, and they're growing, and they're becoming a little more popular. So again, thank you for your work with them. So bringing up Jewish concepts in relation to Jesus is always difficult, because there's so many landmines that you can step on, and this is what I saw in his presentation. Rabbi Tzadok also said that he started his rabbinic school or Torah project to teach people as an anti-missionary group. And, again, I don't have any problem with anybody's individuals, but if your shtick is to disprove somebody else's religion, then there's a lot of ways you can go about it. In a historical sense, I think we need to stay to the facts instead of using some of the tactics that both missionaries and anti-missionaries do, which can cause a lot of problems. So he's debated traditional Christian evangelicals and and has had a bad experience with people attacking him as a Jew, which is this is what we're trying to counter with the show, that people need to be respectful. So you can get into all kinds of debates. But the one thing, if we're gonna get super Jewish about this, is that debating Bible verses is not only a waste of time, but it's also against overall Jewish teaching, because Abraham Joshua Heschel would say that you can go insane trying to debate things that are easily interpreted in many ways. You see the rabbis in the Talmud interpret the same verse 3, 4, 5 different ways, and then coming to a consensus. Why would you go against someone from a different religion, a different interpretive method, and try to disprove them when you know that their perspective is God-given in their heart, and their religion has been built on this tradition, which starts from a different premise? So Jews are only allowed to debate Jewish law, which Jewish law is something that has an impact on all of us. At the end of the video, he says that doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is how you live your life, and I appreciate that. But to build your life in conflict to other religious groups, it's not helpful. And then he even says at the end that if a Jew decides to become a Christian, more power to him, and that he's allowed to pursue whatever gives him peace and happiness. So anti-missionaries are known for being scared that you're losing folks to a different tradition, and I can see their concern and wanting to keep everybody in the fold, but it's almost feeling threatened by a different group that they might not have much to stand on. So we want to build a community on education instead of on retaliation and conflict. So Jesus becomes the boogeyman of Judaism when you allow that type of mentality, the tit for tat conflict. And that's what he started his conversation with. He said that there was Jews who wrote a bunch of polemics, and you can't take those polemics seriously because they're meant to attack back after being spoken evil by the church fathers. And we'll get to the church fathers in the next episode. But this idea that those sources are not good enough, and that needs to be taken into consideration, because he later uses some of those sources to make his claims. So let's get to it. So all these negative connotations toward Jesus comes from people having a bad idea. So he says at the beginning of his presentation that Jesus has no importance in the history of Judaism. He didn't originally, because he wasn't part of the major things that were going on. You would say, well, the temple, the first Jewish Revolt, the second Jewish Revolt, they're all important. But someone who was preaching whatever he was preaching has a little impact when you're dealing with the Roman Empire and you're dealing with the leaders of the temple and stuff like that. So if his message was one of love and peace, then his message was inconsequential, because that's not what people were interested in finding out. They were interested in finding out how can we defeat the enemy. So that goes against his premise that Jesus was a revolutionary, but we will get to that. He uses so he talks about the Talmud and Toldot Jeshu and other sources which speak negatively of Jesus, and then he pushes the idea that Paul was spy of the Sanhedrin. This is something that most likely Chaim Maccabee and Rabbi Shmuley Boteach are into, and that's why it keeps being rehashed. But it's such a giant conspiracy that it's almost impossible to believe that the Jesus movement and Kingdom of God movement was very rebellious and aggressive, and Paul was sent to appease it and make it spiritual. It's almost like it's a forget the expression, but it's a Hail Mary, a way of saying maybe there was good intentions, but it got out of hand. So whatever Paul was, a religious Jew, a Hellenized Jew, to be used in that way and to be able to counter all the extremist views that were being brewed by this group, it's even a bigger miracle than what Christianity became. And him being able to confuse people for so long, it's also very problematic. And it's funny that no historian believes this to be true. So he says his main premise is that the Jesus movement was destructive, and he goes as far as calling them terrorists. I find that very problematic and disastrous because from the experience that we've all had, hearing what happens in the Middle East and what's happened with different attacks in the U.S., it's a loaded term that is hurtful. So to bring that up is problematic. And every they there's this thing in the liberal community where they say someone's freedom fighter is someone's terrorist. That is not true. A terrorist is someone that hurts innocent people for political gain. If you cause some type of harm to military establishment that is occupying your territory or something like that, that is a little bit different. So call someone a rebel or call someone some type of provocateur, a military, plotting against the armed forces is completely different. So he needs to define his terms if he's going to use those abusive terms. And then the slam dunk passage for Jesus being violent is a passage that has been contended for years. So I'll read it to you guys. This is the passage. So it starts off with Jesus entering Jericho. So I'm going to read you the whole passage. So no one can say it's out of context. This is Luke 19. He entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man there was named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see Jesus, who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was short in stature. So we jump to 11. As they were listening to this, he went on to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem, because they supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. So he said, a nobleman went to a distant country to get royal power for himself and then return. He summoned 10 of his slaves and gave them 10 pounds and said to them, do business with these until I come back. But the citizens of his country hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we do not want this man to rule over us. When he returned, having received the royal power, he ordered these slaves to whom he had given the money to be summoned so that he might find out what they had gained by trading. The first came forward and said, Lord, your pound has made 10 more pounds. He said to him, well done, good slave, because you have been trustworthy in every small thing. Take charge of 10 cities. Then the second came saying, Lord, your pound has made 5 pounds. He said to him, and you rule over 5 cities. Then the other came saying, Lord, here's your pound. I wrapped it up on a piece of cloth, for I was afraid of you, because you are a harsh man. You take what you did not deposit and reap what you did not sow. He said to him, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked slave. You knew did you, that I am a harsh man, taking what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not put the money into a bank? Then when I returned, I could have collected it with interest. He said to the bystanders, take the pound from him and give it to the one who has 10 pounds. And they said to him, Lord, he has 10 pounds. I tell you, all those who have more will be given, but from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. But as for these enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and slaughter them in my presence. After he said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. So Rabbi Tzadok does something that I guess it would be called cherry picking, which he takes the aspect of the verse of the parable. The only part that he takes is 1927, which says, bring them here and kill them in front of me. And he says that that's not part of the parable, even though it is, as the next verse says, that he finished After he said this, he went on ahead going up to Jerusalem. So he's saying the parable ends before that, and then the Jesus used that to justify his almost wicked behavior to be destroying his enemies. So this Che Guevara style Jesus that he constructs is one that is constructed on cherry picking a Bible passage. If I have the Jewish annotated New Testament in front of me, and when it comes down to slaughter them, the scholars debate whether the reference is to early political abuse and so a warning about governments or to the final judgment. So we know from the other parables that it's always about those that know a little get treated with contempt because they're not trying, and those that know a lot are blessed with more knowledge or more support from God because they've been trying and they've been faithful to his teachings. So to change the story and to make it where Jesus was coming after his enemies because they weren't supporting him financially, whatever, I really don't know where he was going with this. It's torturing that passage. Another aspect that needs to be considered is that it's almost like an obsession with this idea of Jesus being a revolutionary, a martyr, a zealot, anything that people want to make him to push their agenda. It's very challenging because it creates a different, almost like a different worldview. You have an individual who's known to be a pacifist, and now he's portrayed as a warrior. Again, if you know anything about military and military history, you have to take all that into account. So you have a guy who's not only, you can say this supports the cause. So this is another contention that Rabbi Tzadok makes. He says that Jesus, the Jesus portrayed is not the real Jesus, because the real Jesus, who was a rabbi, and I've debated people about Jesus actually being a rabbi or not, could never be a rabbi without being married. The issue is that being married is a modern interpretation of what a rabbi should be. So a revolutionary, it's good that a revolutionary is not married, because then he can fight and he's not worried about somebody retaliating against his family. Second, if he was always in conflict with Rome, then they would have gotten him quicker, because he would be preaching against Rome, but he's mostly preaching against establishment, which that is part of the prophetic ideas of Judaism, which they all were fighting against corrupt leaders. This idea that you cannot be a religious leader without a wife is not totally true, especially in that time, because the individuals in Qumran, the majority of them were males. They've only found a couple of women. So it wasn't ideal for people not to be married, but it was allowed when you were being persecuted, when you were being mistreated, and when you were at a certain level of holiness. In Judaism, they say that Moses stopped being involved with his wife when he reached a certain level. He was also 80 years old and stuff like that, but they considered it as an extra step of holiness to be celibate, even though later on it's not considered a virtue. It was, at that time, it was considered a virtue because you had control your passions. So now we're going to get to the other issues that he shares, which start getting conspiratorial. So that was the last part of that. I really don't think that this conspiratorial and slam dunk idea that Jesus was violent holds any water, and I'll tell you why. Because again, it seems like we are pushing something for the sake of making a case, and then the case falls apart right in front of him. So Jesus being a revolutionary is one of my biggest pet peeves. We see in the movement multiple aspects of pacificity. They saying that it's the opposite of what it is shows a disregard for the evidence and the majority of the passages. He talks a lot about Peter having a sword and using it swiftly to cut someone's ear. Someone can do that by accident. Someone can do that as a fisherman. He had to slice a lot of fish. He says that he had to be a warrior to be able to do that so suddenly. So again, we're trying to, just like the Latin American, they're called the liberation theologists. They want to make Jesus a revolutionary, so it supports their cause. So as a Jew, to go around saying that Jesus was a revolutionary, it almost feeds into the idea that we like war and we like conflict. He goes as far as saying that he was kind of like the Neturei Karta, who are opposed to the state of Israel. The Neturei Karta are not violent; they are actually pacifistic. And one of the reasons they are opposing the state of Israel is because they say it's too aggressive, and that you need to wait until the Mashiach to take over the land. You don't do it in a physical way. So even demonizing them and to use extreme terms like a terrorist is so problematic, because it causes the very things that we fear the most is like a political attack against someone that you don't agree with. Reza Aslan, in his book, where he makes Jesus into a zealot, does a similar thing, and I want to talk about it later, where he actually, in a sneaky way, is trying to connect Jesus standing against the Romans to modern day violent groups in the Middle East. Rabbi Tzadok also claims two things that are conspiratorial. He says that there's a book called the Jesus Scroll, and in that book, it describes that Jesus was in Masada and that he was hiding. He had faked his crucifixion, and then he went and wrote this document talking about his plan to fight the Romans, and then that the archaeologists found it, and then it was used to manipulate the Catholics to back down on their hatred towards Jews. So the Israeli government has a document that is no longer being able to be found. There's a book that discusses this, which is no longer available. And then there's this conspiracy that the Jews have control over greater religious systems, such as the Catholic Church, and that's the only way you get the Catholic Church to back down. This is ludicrous, since we know from Jewish history that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel worked for years to develop such a relationship with the Catholic Church, to be able to get the Catholic Church to be more open and more understanding of Judaism. And then we know in Catholic history, the reason that the Catholic Church was reformed in the 60s was because they were losing steam after things were coming out about their involvement with the Nazis, and the modern world did not want anything to do with them. So they became more hip and more in tune with the times, more ecumenical and more interfaith, as a new tactic to be able to survive the modern world. So to make it into a conspiracy based on a book that nobody has is very problematic and conflictive, because he also mentions the Holy Grail, Holy Blood, which is complete hoax. So having dealt with conspiracies for the last 8 years, we know that conspiracies are wild, and they start with little lies and then they become big lies. And it's one answer for all your questions is this conspiracy, to think that the Jews and the Masons and the Jesuits, they're working together to create a new world order. It just feeds into this by talking about conspiracies, including the one about the Jesus Scroll. This idea that Jesus was a revolutionary, a violent rebel, is something he proposes, and then he turns around and he says that he wasn't. He was actually a Torah observant Jew, and he spoke Jewish stuff, and they were able to discern the ridiculous anti-Roman stuff from the beautiful Jewish stuff if you read the New Testament carefully. Which one is it? Is he either can you be both? Can you be a violent resistor and also a religious Jew? Can you be, or he goes as far as calling Jesus a misogynist and a Gentile hater, which is very disturbing, because it's again the political aspect of getting rid of someone is to demonize them and to describe them in negative terms. So he speaks on both sides of his mouth when he says that he was an extremist, and then he's also a teacher of Torah. So we have dealt with the misogynist stuff. We've dealt with the anti-Gentile stuff. and it doesn't hold water because it's all within the context of that culture and what was going on. Then later, Rabbi Tzadok says that the aspect of him being the Logos in the Gospel of John becomes a Jewish concept because you can turn it into the Logos being the Torah. And then when Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, he actually means the Torah as the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father but through the Torah. But then Jesus is the Torah if you follow that logic. So then he's just struggling through all these different ideas. So to put it all together, we want to know the history and separate it from the religious developments and not go back and forth and create more conflict. He says that everything Orthodox is cool, and then everything that is not Orthodox is falsehood. To impose an anachronistic term such as Orthodoxy in the first century is not good history, because it supports the idea that the modern Orthodox Jewish movement has a historical connection with ancient Judaism, and that connection is limited because they were created in opposition to the Reform and the Conservative movement, which was later on, and every group hijacks the tradition to claim it as their own. Right now, Orthodoxy is in line with classical Judaism, which is wonderful, but to use Orthodoxy as the standard is to claim that the Orthodox have everything right and all the truth. So that is a political statement and almost like a religious push from his side. We know the differences. We can see in history the differences. We can see the commonalities, but there's no like one-to-one correlation as some people try to claim. And then he says that biblical Judaism was actually paganized because it was the paganism of worshiping Molech and worshiping demons and not serving God. And there was only a few who served God, which were the prophets. That's very limited perspective. We know that ancient Israelite religion was very loving and kind, and that those were the outliers. We won't even go into his movie review of the movie Apocalypto by Mel Gibson, which he calls a spade a spade. He says that the native population were sacrificing children and doing destructive behavior. But him making a generalization in that sense is very problematic, because that's the kind of generalization people make against us. He doesn't know every native that ever existed. There was 2 major empires that were oppressive, but there was thousands of other natives that did their own thing. So we have to give people some respect and and not make those generalizations. He says that he's friends with the Opus Dei and the Jesuits and all these wild cats, but that he finds respectful collaboration, which I'm always supportive of interfaith dialogue. But again, we have to stick to the subject. We're going to discuss history. If we're going to discuss the development of religion, we're going to do that too. But we have to have some parameters, some rules. He brings stuff out of the left field, like the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Jesus Scroll book that doesn't exist anymore. It causes more confusion. One last thing that he mentioned was the name Jeshu. He says that Jeshu is the Aramaic of Jesus, and it has nothing to do with Yeshua and Yehashua. Well, it's actually the Aramaic of Yehashua, which short is Yeshua, and in Aramaic is Jeshu. Later, it became a term of contention against Jesus or condemnation, but it's equivalent to all the other terms. I use Yehashua because I think it's more historical. The other ones have religious connotations. I think it's not constructive to try to revitalize a name that is being used as offensive ways. He also says that the term Notzri or Nazrim has to do with rebellion. As far as I know, it has to do with a branch or something that is separate. So we can discuss that further. But again, we have to be very meticulous in our methodology when we try to discuss these subjects. When when he says that Jesus was quoting Rabbi Hillel at times, we have to understand that in the Talmud, the school of Hillel is the one that it is supported, and his enactments are the ones that are being pursued. And the school of Shammai was the one that the Pharisees followed, and it was a more strict and more conflictive. And the Pharisees are actually seen in a negative light in the Talmud. So a lot of anti-missionaries would say that the Pharisees are the foundation of Judaism, and that is incorrect. They had one representative or a few in the Sanhedrin of Yavne, so they want to make a one-to-one correlation between the Pharisees and the Talmudic sages, which that is not true. And then if Jesus was calling Hillel and the rabbis follow Hillel, they had more commonality than in conflict. So I don't want people to keep perpetuating those ideas that we not only support the ancient Sanhedrin of Caiaphas, but we support the Perushim, which are seen as people who are extremists. So talk about who's the real extremist in this case. And in the teachings of Jesus, you can see all kinds of things that balance things out. So again, we have to think clearly about the stuff without politicizing and confusing people. In the next episode, we'll discuss a very interesting topic in relation to the Jewish Catholic version of Jesus.